So if you saw my last video, I was installing this HEI distributor, replacing a points distributor, because I thought the gears in the distributor had stripped again, and shame on me, I didn't check it. But actually what happened is my cable broke to the tack, so I'm going to have to get a new one of those. But that's not what today's video is about. Today, well, let me go back and explain what happened after I put the distributor in. The video ended kind of abruptly because once I got it to fire, I knew I was okay, I could get it to run. Problem was, when I tried to start it again, the battery was dead. So I charged it, I timed it as best I could. I could never find the timing marks, and I think maybe they installed the cam advanced, so not knowing what's inside that engine, I don't know what to do other than to take it through a process where I adjust the timing, run it, see if I'm getting pre-ignition or ping as they call it, and then if I'm not, advance it a little more until I get it, and then back it off a little bit, and that should be a good timing for power for this car. So I timed it as good as I could real quickly, because I was going to Super Summit the next day, and I did take it, and kind of surprised me. I ran 2 to 3 miles an hour faster than I did last year with the points ignition. Now the timing might have been different. That might I might have just got lucky with my ear, because I timed it by ear, and it ran really well, except for one thing, and it's a known problem with these older cars that have mechanical fuel pumps attached to the engine. When the engine gets hot, and then you're not pumping enough fuel through the fuel pump for it to stay fresh and cool, the fuel will actually bubble, and then once you get air in there, you can't suck the fuel from the tank all the way up to the fuel pump. So this has happened on this car now, and it has happened on my 76. So the solution to that problem, at least for me, is I'm going to put in an electric fuel pump in the rear of the car that will push the gas, and it'll stay cooler back there. So it will push the gas into the fuel pump, and the fuel pump will be able to push it. Initially, I'm going to set it up so that the fuel pump is pushing it to the mechanical fuel pump. The electric fuel pump's pushing it to the mechanical fuel pump. And I'm going to try that because I have a regulator. Fuel pump I have says you don't need a regulator, but the carburetor says you want to keep it under 6 psi. So I've got a regulator. I can focus in on that for you. Over there. But I don't have a regulator that will take a return line. So if I were going to regulate it, I would want a return line so that the fuel pump isn't working against all that pressure built up. The other thing about going through the fuel pump, and I don't know what the mechanical fuel pump, and I don't know whether it really will help it or not, but there is a return line on that fuel pump, so hopefully if there's more pressure than I need, it will route back to the fuel tank from the mechanical pump. And if that works out okay, I may never change to a regulator with a return, but time will tell on that. I'm going to try this out, take it out, run it hard, make sure it gets hot, park it for a few minutes because that's usually when the vapor lock occurs, and then see how it runs with the electric assist, if you will. So one of the things that I did when I put this HEI distributor on is there is a line from the solenoid of the starter that it was wired wrong in this car, but it's supposed to go to the coil to provide 12 volts when you're cranking the engine to help it start. And I kept this wire here, I just taped it up, wondering whether I'd ever need it. And as it turns out, there's a safety device for the fuel pump that will turn it off if your oil pressure drops below 5 pounds. So if you would get into an accident, your engine would stall, you wouldn't have a fuel pump pumping gasoline to a potentially severed line or a line with a leak in it. So that little safety device goes into a T. This right here goes into the block and it attaches to the sending unit for the oil pressure gauge that's in the car. So I'm going to tee that off and put on the other side of it the safety switch that you run your power to it from your hot wire for your ignition, and to another terminal on it you run this wire from the solenoid so that while you're cranking the engine it gets power to the fuel pump through here, and the switch that's in that safety device. And once you release the key, you're no longer cranking it, then this wire is dead and you get power from the ignition wire, which on this car is right over here. It goes to the HEI distributor. So the first thing I'm going to do is I think I'm going to remove that distributor cap just so that it's easier to see what I'm doing, and hopefully that'll make the job a little bit easier. Sometimes the hardest part of making these videos is getting the camera at an angle where I can take the video but not be too much in the way of it as I'm working. So what I have here is this safety switch that I was talking about, and you can see a terminal labeled P for pump, S for solenoid or starter, and I for ignition, so it's pretty self-explanatory on how you have to hook it up. What I'm going to have to do is get this fitting down in here oriented in such a way that I can get this on from one angle and the fuel pressure sending unit on from another, and make them both work. So I'm going to take off the wire, and it's a black wire with just a flat spade plug receptacle in it, and now I'm going to go get a wrench to take off this pressure sending unit. So it's a 9/16 wrench, and there is a nice hex thing on here that allows you to get to it. It's a little crowded in there, so it's kind of hard to get your wrench on it. There, now we have the pressure sending unit off. It just screws into the fitting and has a wire on the end. Now to go after the actual fitting here. Looks like it's a, that was, by the way, a 9/16 inch wrench I used on that. This one looks like it's 7/16. There's a plug in the top of here. So either the plug will come out or the fitting will come off. And it looks like the fitting is coming off, and that's actually the better of the two options, because now I don't have to figure out how to get the fitting off. And I can put the fitting in a vise and take out the plug, so that and I'm going to have to orient the T fitting the other way. This had the plug at the top. I'm going to have to orient it so that the line coming out of the intake manifold goes straight up, and the two switches essentially that are attached to it are going to need to go to the sides. And hopefully there's enough room there, because if there isn't, I'm not quite sure. Well, I guess what I'll have to do is get a 90-degree elbow fitting for this new safety switch, and then that should fit. But we won't know that until we try it. So the entire fitting came out of the block. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out of the T and orient it so this part of the T is on here, and then each side going left and right from there will take either the fuel pressure sending unit or that safety switch for the fuel pump. So here's the T. I put it in a vise and change the orientation of it. I'm going to put it into the intake manifold there. Hopefully there's enough clearance to screw it in so that I can get the other two fittings on, or sending units on it. There is the hole in the manifold. And let's see if we got clearance. There's a little ridge on the intake manifold that maybe as we screw it in will become an issue, but so far I don't think it will. Now the question is, what can I get on this to help screw it in? I need to end up with it pointing in roughly this direction, so there'll be room for the sending unit and for the safety switch. Okay, time to shut off the video until I decide how I'm going to do that. Okay, so I think I got something that's going to work. A 9/16 inch wrench fits on there, and the adjustable wrench will fit on the shaft of this so that I can turn it. And I didn't test it, so you're going to find out when I find out. And it does work. just get that in there good and snug so that it doesn't leak. And then we'll put the other two fittings in it. And I have to make sure that I get it aligned in a way that I can get both of those sending units in there. Or it'll create problems. Probably would have been a little easier to take off that distributor, but I'm not sure whether or not that would have saved me time because this isn't too bad. I think this is going to be the last quarter turn, so well, that looks like it'll work. Hopefully it won't leak. Gonna take a note here that the starter terminal is in the middle. Left of that is the ignition. Starter's in the middle. Left of that is the ignition. The right of that is to the fuel pump. So that's what I'm going to need to know for wiring it later. So try to get this in. Shouldn't be a problem other than finding room for my hands in there to make it work. So they're both in there. Now what I'll do is I'll take the wrench, tighten up the pressure sending unit, and then there's no wrench fitting on the other unit, but what it does have is a knurled end that looks like I might be able to get some sort of channel locks in there on it or something to make sure it's tight. Okay, the sending into this pipe. Find the wire that goes to it. That should work. And now I'll find the wire that went to the starter, or the solenoid on the starter. And well, we've got to untape that and put it on the correct terminal on the safety switch. And if I don't get this off soon, I'm going to shut off the... Oh, there it is. I was going to shut off the camera so that you wouldn't be watching 10 minutes of me searching for the end of the black tape. Oh, okay. That wasn't as smooth as what I thought it was going to be because we've got the wrong kind of a terminal on this. What I will have to do is clip that off. I don't know if you can see it's a eyelet terminal, and I need a spade type. I will clip that off and put a spade terminal on it, and then we'll be able to hook it up. Okay, so I found a spade type connector. So it's time to snip, strip, I like to twist the wire so they all go in better. Okay, I've got that seated on there pretty good. And now we can crimp. And clip it on to the solenoid post, which was in the middle. So we've got our power from the starter to the safety switch so that we can have the fuel pump pumping while we're cranking the engine. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to verify that I have a connection that is only powered when the ignition is on. So clipping it to that, which I already know is powered when the ignition is on, but whoops, I better make sure the ignition isn't on. So that's hot all the time. We don't really want that. Let me look at the wire that I wired into the where did it go? The wire that powers the distributor basically is what I'm looking for. And okay, here it is. So that there. Clip a ground onto the engine. It's not lit. We're going to turn the ignition on. There you have it. It's powered only when the ignition is on. So that's what we want. I'm going to tap into that wire, which is going to be a little different than what I thought it was, because I thought I was going to be able to tap into this one here. But we will get to work on what kind of fittings I need in order to, or terminals I need in order to tap into that and have it power both the distributor and the safety switch. So what I've done is I've made a little jumper wire. It's got a spade clip on one end that I'm going to hook into the safety switch. The other end I'm going to use just a wire splicer. I'm going to put the hot wire from the ignition switch into one end of that, and from it I'm going to feed both the distributor and that safety switch. That safety switch isn't going to be a big draw because, dang, that's a hard wire. It's not going to be a big draw because what I'm going to do, I'm not actually going to feed the fuel pump from it. I'm just going to feed a relay, which is going to take the power directly off the battery to feed the fuel pump. That way there won't be much of a draw on the ignition here. Okay, hopefully the camera's still showing this. And I'm going to take both of these wires, twist them together. Take my connector, feed those into the connector. Making sure I get the insulation past that, or at least up to it, and then I can tape it. But make sure I've got a good connection here inside the connector. That's the main thing I want to accomplish here. Both of those wires are in there good. I'll take the other end of the wire and connect it to them. Good. Clamp it down tight. And connect this to the safety switch. And I can read the eye on it so I know it's the proper one for the ignition switch. Okay, so those are in. The only other thing that's left is to add the wire that goes to the pump, and actually in this case it's going to go to the relay. So I'll get the relay and show that to you. So this is the relay kit that I got from Summit Racing. It contains the relay, the wiring harness, and a circuit breaker. So the circuit breaker goes between the battery and the fuel pump. It does not go between the trigger for the relay, which is the yellow wire, and then the gray wire is a ground for that, that trigger. The red is connected to the battery, purple goes to the fuel pump. Pretty simple. The only thing that's hard about it is trying to figure out where to run the wires. Okay, we're going into the car now. I've already fed the wire through the first spot. There was another wire already going through it, and I just pushed the additional wire through it. I've got all the other wiring for the wiring harness here for the relay, and the wires coming through. I'm going to pull as much of it as I can through, and then what I'm going to do is run it up along the driver's side console. I run it up alongside the console under the dashboard, and there's already a hole in the firewall where the tack cable goes through. Should have a grommet in it, but the grommet is deteriorated. But there's a big hole right there. I'll send it up through there, bring it over to the, it'll be the pump side of the safety switch. So that should not be too hard to do. The big thing there is to make sure as you're going up under the dashboard that you don't have it get involved with any of the gas pedal, brake pedal, shifter, anything like that that could, you know, that it could impede or could cut the wire, because neither of those situations is any good. So I'm going to finish pulling that wire, and then we'll make the connection up here to the switch and put the distributor cap back on. So we got the wire for the relay all the way up through the dashboard, coming out through the firewall. Just a matter of stripping this off, putting a clamp on, or a spade connector on it, hooking it up to the safety switch, and we'll be done under the hood. So then what I'll do is I'll put the distributor cap back on, make sure I've got the wires on in the right firing order, because I just pulled them off any which way. But I will make sure that I've got those on there correctly. And some of this other stuff that I moved out of the way. And then I'll take some wire ties and tie some of those wires up out of the way, just to make it a little less cluttered under there. Because it is kind of cluttered. Let's pull that in a little bit closer. I don't know if we can actually see the safety switch where I'm going to connect it or not. Don't think I can. Let's move it over here. There it is. Now there's the only thing in the way of the camera is this vacuum line for the vacuum advance. But I'm going to take this wire and run it under there with the other wires so that I can wire tie them together. And they're not every which way in the way of everything. Okay, this one's going to be the toughest one to get to, and I saved it for last because it was the hardest wire to run. Going pretty much by feel here because I can't see anything with my hand in the way. Almost had it. There we go. That went on that time. So I'll just wire tie these together since they all go to the same place. Maybe I'll get myself some of that plastic split loom and just slip it on there at a later date. But for now, everything is wired up underneath the hood, except, of course, to put the distributor cap back on and reconnect all the spark plug wires. So there, it's all put back together. I'm going to double check the firing order one last time. 1, 8, 4, 3, 6, 5, 7, 2. These wires are nicely numbered so that you can hook them up to the correct cylinder. Since I didn't connect them at I did not disconnect them at the spark plug, I feel comfortable that the firing order is correct. So, it took me a long time to figure out what exactly I wanted to do here. And it revolves around the fact that the pump inlet is on that side. So that makes it difficult to mount it and route the hoses, the gas hoses neatly. And there's also a very large pre-filter that's going on it, so it has to flow in a certain direction. So what I eventually came up with is, since my outlet from the gas tank is here, what I will do is I will mount this here and clamp it on with maybe a big hose clamp. Take the gas from the tank with a line, connect it to this, connect another rubber hose from this, and bring it over to here where I will mount the fuel pump. So the fuel pump will be mounted roughly about here. And a hose will go from the filter to the fuel pump, and then another hose will go out from the pump, and I'm going to bring it inside the gas tank over here, looped around, so that it's neat, out of the way of anything hot like mufflers. And more importantly, the only other place I could have mounted it was near the back bumper, but I didn't want to mount it there just in the event of a rear end accident. Might have cut one of the lines, and then you might have the engine still running for a while and the fuel pump still be running. So I'm trying to keep those out of the way of where they could get damaged in a rear end collision. Of course, you can never be 100% sure, but we're going to make it as safe as we can. One of the things I want to do while I have the car up on the lift is decide where I'm going to run the wires for the fuel pump. I've already determined that I'm going to mount the fuel pump here, and there is room to go over this cross member, and there's room to go over the differential mount. So what I intend to do, provided there's no wires or cables or fuel lines in the way, see if I can get this camera up in here, is come through the back of the center portion of the 3 consoles in the interior. Really tough to get in there. What I'm trying to do is to find out whether or not there is anything in the way if I just drill a hole at the top of that panel and run the wire out there, and then across those 2 cross members to the fuel pump. I think it'll be okay as long as I don't go through as long as I just barely go through the fiberglass. Let's see if I can get it from over here. So yes, what I'm looking at is coming through this panel right up here. That is not a brake line, that's just a place where they join fiberglass together, but my wires will come out roughly there, and they'll be able to go over the differential mount, over the cross member, and to the fuel pump. I think that's going to work out just great. Be a pretty short run of wire. Nothing in the way. One of the things I noticed is someone added an alarm. They put the horn on the back here, and they've run these wires, and they've gone over the cross members and such, which is good. And then you can see them running down here behind the half shaft, and that, in my opinion, is a little bit too close to the half shaft, so I wouldn't want my fuel pump electric running there. It's been running like this for a long time and hasn't caused any problems, so I'm not in a hurry to change that, but I think I will change that eventually if I even use the alarm. Behind the seats in the C3 Corvettes, there are 3 little bins. One holds the battery. There's a small one, and these are missing the containers that are in there. There's a small one that's kind of like a glove box supposedly, and then there's a bigger one that's where the jack is kept. So since I don't have the containers, I'm going to mount my relay and my grounding block and my circuit breaker right in that area there. And I think even if I had the box, it would fit in over above those things because it's not very deep. But I am going to have to put the camera down because I can't use the drill driver and hold the camera at the same time. Okay, there's the receptacle for the relay mounted. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mount the circuit breaker. They tell you to mount that close to the battery, so yeah, close enough. I will put that in. So there's the circuit breaker next to the relay. And there's one more thing that I'm going to add here that didn't come with the kit, but I had it laying around from some wiring I did in the house. I'm going to add a multiple port, if you will, grounding strip. And the reason I'm doing that is because the Corvette's being a fiberglass body, sometimes it's hard to find a ground. So if I have this strip in there connected to the negative port of the battery, negative terminal of the battery, then I can just run a wire to that and I'll have a good ground no matter where in the car I'm using it. So there already was a ground wire hooked up to the negative battery terminal. It was going to an amplifier that was in the back here. I have taken it out because my radio wasn't working. I don't know whether I'm going to put it back in, but I've got the radio working. So anyways, I ran that to that grounding block. The other thing I'm going to run to that is the gray wire from the wiring harness. Remember, that's the one that it completes the circuit to trigger the relay. So I'm going to slip that in. I'm in an awkward position, so I'm having trouble holding the camera steady. But we're going to slip that in the next slot in the grounding block, if I can. I'm probably going to have to put the camera down to do that. And then tighten down the screws. So our grounding block will be a good source of ground for the fuel pump that we're going to add. I'll use one of the terminals for that. And if I ever add the amplifier back in the back here, I can just hook that into this grounding block as well. The next step is going to be to cut this red wire to length so that it can reach the circuit breaker, and then we'll attach a terminal into it so that we can make a nice clean connection there. So we have the relay then, which the red wires goes to it, and it's connected to the circuit breaker. The last thing for the power side is we're going to add, using the leftover wire from the circuit breaker or the relay harness, we're going to put this wire in, and that'll be the one that will connect to the hot side of the circuit breaker, and eventually will go to the battery on the positive terminal. One thing that I haven't probably mentioned or made clear is that as I'm running these wires, I am paying attention to that mess in the battery box there and making sure that I don't cross wires between that positive terminal and the negative terminal, so that I can take those terminals off of the battery and I have enough excess wire so that they can be taken off moved aside without being tangled with that mess of wiring. That fuse that you see there on that orange wire is what goes to that horn that I showed you for the alarm system in the back of the car. I don't even know if that alarm system's still in the car. I don't think it is. So at some point that may get taken out of there. So I added the terminal onto the red wire. That's going to my circuit breaker. And when I went to look at how it was connected and make sure that it fit under this screw with the right terminal, this wire was just shoved under there with no terminal on it. So I added a terminal to make it a little bit neater. Right now I am just going to put this screw back in because I'm not hooking it up just yet. I don't want to be playing with that while it's live, but we're all ready to just take that screw out and that bolt out and slip those two wires underneath it, and we'll be finished once we get everything else in place. This purple wire, that's the last thing that's attached to the relay harness, is the one that goes to provide power to the fuel pump. So I will end up drilling a hole somewhere around here and running that out to the fuel pump when we're ready for it. But I'm not going to do that until we figure out exactly where the fuel pump's going to be mounted, so that I can go ahead and mount that, cut it to the correct length. And we don't want any power in it until we're done. So it will just sit back here waiting for us to return. As I said before, I want to mount the fuel pump right up in here. This is going to be kind of hard to hold up here with the weight of this fuel pump, so I loosened the screw in the bracket here, and the fuel pump comes out so that I can just measure for my spacing on the bracket. The fuel pump is able to slide up and down in here to get the height you want, so it won't be a problem if I have the bracket mounted a little higher or lower than where it was attached to the fuel pump when I got it. So I was able to reach up through one, there's a hole on the side. I was able to reach up and see that the overlap for this weld is about 1/2 inch. So if I line up my bracket at the bottom of that weld, then I'll only have to drill through 1/8 inch of metal rather than 1/4. And that should be plenty. There's a lot of other things that are held onto the frame, and that's all the thicker it is. So I lined up that bracket and I made myself a mark here for a starter hole, and it's going to take a while, so I'm not going to film the filling of the holes, but what I will say is I'm going to probably use 3 different size drill bits, one to get it punched through to begin with, and then 2 progressively larger ones to make the hole bigger until I get it to the diameter of the self-tapping screw or bolt that I am going to put in there to hold the pump on. Okay, so there's the bracket mounted. I will slip the fuel pump up with the rubber padding it has to reduce the noise a little bit, making sure the inlet is over here because I'm coming from the fuel tank to the fuel filter to the pump and then out to the engine. So once I'm ready to actually mount this, which I'm not ready to do just yet because I am going to have to run some gas out of the car before I cut the line, because I only have a 5-gallon can to fill up, so I gotta make sure I have less than 5 gallons in that tank. When I cut that line, I'm gonna put a pistol clamp on it, on the line, on both sides of it, and then cut it in the middle, and use a nipple that's got barbs on both ends to my new fuel line, which will be in the gas tank, or the gas can, and then into this line. But that's about where it's going to be, approximately, up or down a little bit. There's some wiggle room there. There's also some wiggle room if I need to move this to center it to make it perfect. So I've siphoned off most of the gas from the gas tank. I tried to run it out by using the car a little bit, and ended up with vapor lock. It stranded me again for a little bit until it cooled down. So I turned that around immediately and decided I just needed to buy another gas can so that I'd have enough gas can space to store all the gas I was going to take out. So I'm getting ready to cut the line to the fuel tank from between the fuel tank and the line that goes to the front of the car. What I've done is, you can see this, about 8 feet of gas hose, which is what I'm going to use. I probably don't need 8 feet, but I ran it down into my gas can. It's almost empty because when I was siphoning out the tank, it ran till the siphon quit. So I think we're good to go there. It's not going to overflow that gas tank. So what I'm going to do is, there's still some in there because you can't get it all to siphon out. So I'm going to take a couple of these pistol clamps, and I'm going to try and clamp the fuel line shut to, hopefully I can shut off the gas flow completely, but at the very least I can minimize it. So that looks pretty good. I'll clamp it off from the other side as well, because I don't want too much flowing back from the fuel line. And I'm giving myself enough space in there to get a cutter in there to cut the line. I think that should shut it off. What I've done is, on the end of the fuel line I have a barb, and I'm just going to cut that line. I'm going to insert that barb into the line where I cut it, and then it will drain into the gas can. So I have to shut the camera off for a bit because I didn't bring my cutter over. So it's about time to actually mount the fuel pump. Now, there's a screw that goes through here that tightens on the fuel pump to hold it in place. And I kind of don't trust myself to be able to hold this up here and tighten that, because you need a screwdriver and a little wrench or a socket or something to do that. So I'm going to try to figure out about how much of this I want to be showing. And I'm going to take the bracket off and tighten up that screw because I can't hold that fuel pump up there and use two tools at the same time. Okay, paying close attention to which port is the in and which is the out and the way you want it mounted. Once you've got that tightened into the bracket, you can mount the pump. Okay, the fuel pump is mounted. There was virtually no gas that came out of this line, but just to be sure, before I disconnect the drain line, I'm going to crimp it off again, clamp it so that nothing can leak. That barb doesn't want to come out of there. Feel good. I might have to cut that off. A piece of fuel line is trash anyways, so I cut it off and make it where I can work on it easier. Okay, so I just cut that off, hooked it up to the fuel line to the front of the car, and now I'm going to relieve that clamp, drain anything that might be in there. And again, I don't expect there's going to be much at all. While that's draining, I'm going to put the fuel filter up. Okay, the fuel pump, or fuel filter rather, I'm just going to put on with some hose clamps, and it's going to sit right up in here. So I've loosened the hose clamp, taken it apart. I'm just going to slip it under there and making sure that I aligned it so that I can get to the screw. Just going to put two of them on there like this, and then I'm going to insert the fuel filter in there and run my hoses to it. So I've got it mounted there already, and the impact driver will make short work of tightening up those clamps. Okay, that fuel filter's not going anywhere. So what I'm doing now is trying to figure out the best way to make this so that this line doesn't sag at all, but giving it enough room so that it doesn't kink. So I'm going to try it about here. Now I've already hung a hose clamp over there so I don't forget it before I put it on. And I'm going to slip it onto the hose. Slip the hose onto the nipple coming out of the fuel pump, fuel filter. Okay, looks like that's going to do it. I hope I have the right socket on here. Of course not. Okay, now that I've got the right socket, I'll tighten up those two clamps. And I'll start to put the one on from the fuel line, I'm sorry, from the gas tank to the fuel filter. No, maybe I won't. I'll do it from the fuel pump to the fuel line first, because that way once I open that up, I can be ready to slip that hose right on there and be done with it. So that was a little bit difficult to get off. What I find helps when you're running into that problem is to just take a razor knife, cut a slit, comes right off. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start the hose on there. First I'm going to slip a hose clamp on it. Always nice to do so you don't forget it. Okay, it's on. I'm going to tighten that in because I'm going to have to spend a little time figuring out the best way to route this hose. Unfortunately, the hose points in the wrong direction, if you will, or the hard line points in the wrong direction, and it's going to make it difficult. I've got to loop it around. But in the meantime, I will have this end tightly connected. And I'll be done over there. Okay, Now to figure out how to route it. So I found a way to route it to keep it away from the mufflers and heat and everything. I have a nylon clamp up there holding it to the frame. I'm going to have to replace it with something similar to this, where it's metal with rubber padding so it doesn't cut into the line. But I don't have one of the correct size, and that's just one bolt to take out and put back in to get it all set. So I'm going to tighten that up, and then I am going to start the last piece back here, which is, or at least the last part of the fuel line back here, which is from the gas tank to the fuel filter. So I'm attaching it firmly to the fuel pump first, or fuel filter first. I've got the fuel pump on my mind. And I'm going to measure how much I need to bring it around to this fitting that goes to the fuel tank. Cut it off, slip it on there, put the clamp on, then slip it on there. Tighten it up, and everything back here will be done except for the final wiring. So my goal here is going to be to slit this tube, the hose, take it off and put the other hose from the fuel filter on as quickly as possible, just in case there's anything left in there to leak out. I don't think there is, but just in case there is, we want this to be as quick as possible. Now there's nothing in there. Try to slip that on a little bit more. And then I'll slip the clamp back over it and tighten it up. And we should be done underneath, except for a little bit of a tying this up, just to keep it up off the muffler. That should be good and tight. Tie that up. I might need to put another one of those clamps like I did over by the fuel pump, just to make sure that that never comes down. And that's it for underneath here in the back, except for the wiring, and I'll be back to that later. Now I'm going to try to start this and run it out of gas from the fuel line and the carburetor and such, so that I don't setting the choke here from the outside, so that I don't have fuel spilling whenever I disconnect the fuel pump and pressure sensor, fuel pressure regulator. I had to shut the radio off because YouTube once banned one of my videos because while I was drag racing, I had a copyrighted song playing on the radio. finally out of gas. It's amazing how long that ran with just the gas that was in the carburetor. So now I'm going to take apart the current fuel distribution system, or whatever you want to call it. I do have a pressure regulator on there because I was having problems when I was autocrossing with the engine kind of loading up on me, and I thought it was a too much pressure problem. Turned out it was probably this vapor lock that was causing it. But at any rate, I put a fuel pressure regulator on there, and I don't have a return style, but I'm going to make a return style. Or I'm going to put one on. I've got one. I'm having trouble with getting this apart because I need two 11/16 wrenches, or maybe an adjustable. But anyway, there's three ways that you can set up when you're converting a car from a mechanical fuel pump to a electric fuel pump, and you're trying to cure a vapor lock issue. Number one, you can put the fuel pump in, the electric, and only turn it on whenever you're having symptoms of vapor lock. And that's fine if that's what you want to do. The other way is you can leave the mechanical fuel pump. You can add the electric and have them both operating. And the third, which is what I am going to do, is eliminate the mechanical pump altogether. And the reason I'm doing that is when I vapor locked the other day, as I was trying to get the gas ran out of the thing, I poured some water down on the fuel pump to cool it off, and as I was looking at it, I noticed my connecting hoses, which are special hoses on this with an S-bend in them, are and there's actually a little bit of gas flowing out of there. But those two hoses that are in there are special S-bend hoses that are made that way because the suction from the fuel pump will actually collapse a regular hose that's bent that far. So instead of playing around with the getting new hoses for that, that's how I was going to install it. I'm just going to take off the fuel pump and put a plate there to block the opening where the fuel pump goes in, so that I don't lose oil there. And that was not the way I was going to go until I saw those cracks in the lines. I was going to run both pumps and run them all the time. But as a result, I decided I would get a return fuel pressure regulator so that gasoline that's pumped up there and is not used will return to the tank with the return line that's in there. And I'm just going to use the 5/16 line that was on the car for the mechanical fuel pump. Even though they recommend using the same size as your line that provides the fuel to the carburetor. And the reason I'm going to do it that way is that line's already in there, and the pump I have is kind of self-regulating, so that if it builds up too much pressure, it just doesn't pump anymore. So if I don't get all of the pressure relieved, it's kind of okay, because a good portion of it will be relieved. And relieving that pressure is said to increase the life of the fuel pump, the electric fuel pump. So, keeps on dripping on me. So what I'm doing is I'm taking off this old fuel pump, or pressure regulator that was on there, and I'm going to replace it with the one that has the return port on it. So there's the new regulator on. Interestingly enough, the bypass regulator, either of the two ports can be used as in or out. The only one that is significant that you use it in the correct way is the return port. So what I did is I had two blue fittings that are AN6 that fit it. So I put the blue ones on the in-out, and I had a black one. I put that on the return, so that if you look at it, you can kind of tell that it's different. So I'm going to tighten that up now, and probably the next thing I'll do is remove the fuel pump. So here's a look at the fuel lines going to the fuel pump. The 3/8 is the supply, the 5/16 is the return. What I'm going to do is, like I did in the back, I'm just going to unscrew those bolts, slit the lines, and just remove them and throw them away, because I'm afraid they're no good. Now, what I'm going to do to make myself have a little bit of easier time of it is I'm going to remove this clamp that holds that to the frame temporarily, so that I can push these over to the side and get my impact driver on that, so that I can just take those bolts off easily, or those clamps off easily. One thing I've learned with working on cars, a lot of times a big long extension is the best tool you can have, because you can put it down into places where you can't get a swing at the bolt, and it takes you forever to get it out. Well, you can get it away from all the obstructions by using that long extension, and it makes it a lot quicker. So that worked. It helped me to be able to move the lines, and it's going to make it a little easier to get the screws out, I think. I may be wrong about that, because they are twisted a little bit to the side. I'm having trouble getting a straight shot at them. It is going to make it easier, but I'm not going to be able to use the impact driver. I'm going to have to use the small 3/8 ratchet, or 1/4 inch ratchet, and just pull it aside and work it off. So I mentioned before how handy it is to have a big long extension. This is the easiest way that I have found to remove a fuel pump from a Chevy, mechanical fuel pump. You just take the wheel off and go in with your big long extension. There's a shot right to the bolts. If I had an adapter so that I could use the impact wrench on here, this would be off already. But I don't have it here. I have it in my other shop. Can't even reach the bolt with my hand. There's some zip ties holding the other hose on there. I'm going to have to snip those. And there's the fuel pump. This was the hose that was zip tied on. And you can see I was talking about these hoses being cracked and needing replaced. That's why I'm eliminating the fuel pump. Now what I'll do is go under there, and there's another little plate in there that holds the rod that runs along the camshaft to pump in and out. It pushes in and out on this lever as the cam rotates, and that's what causes the pumping action on the mechanical fuel pump. So right there is the other view of the view of the other plate that's got to come off. Looks like maybe 7/16 bolts holding it on, but now that the fuel pump's out of the way, there's a lot more room to work there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get in there, get under that with a screwdriver, pry that plate off, and the rod that holds that actually pumps the oil pump will fall out. If you are changing it and you're not, you're putting a mechanical pump back on, there is a bolt right up here on the side that you can take that out and you can put a longer one in and you can hold that rod in place. It makes it much easier to get the oil pump in. But since I'm getting rid of the mechanical pump entirely, it's going to go. Had to pry that plate off, but as soon as I pried it off, the push rod for the oil pump came sliding right out. So now what I'm going to have to do is clean that up and put my cover plate that I bought that will actually just replace this, keep the oil from leaking out. So there's the oil pump block-off plate. in place. I put it in with form a gasket, if you will, the creamy type stuff that you just put it in. You squeeze it just enough till it starts coming out around the edges, and that's it. You don't tighten it any tighter. You don't want it to be bottoming out against the metal. So that's done. I'll put the tire back on now, and I'll go back up the top and connect some of the other fuel lines. I had the wheel off, so I'm going to torque it to 75 foot-pounds, which is what the spec calls for these cars, because they've got 7/16 wheel studs. Some of the newer cars have half-inch studs. They can take 100 pounds. I like to go around twice. I don't know if it does any good or not, but makes me feel comfortable. That's good on the second trip around. None of them moved before they clicked. I'm adding the fuel supply to the regulator. And now I'll add the return line. Okay, those are on. All I have to do is wait for the compression fittings to convert to the 6 AM lines that these will go to. And all the plumbing is done. Just have to tighten this one with a wrench because I didn't do that yet. So I'm ready to wire the fuel pump in. I've got some 3/8 inch split wire loom. That's the inside diameter apparently, because it looks like I need a 1/2 inch hole to put that through the fiberglass so that I can protect the wires. So I'm just going to put it right through here, and I'm trying something different. I'm trying to drill this hole with a spade bit. We'll see how it goes. Oops, that's reverse. Okay. I'll try to insert it. Hopefully I'll be able to find it on the underside of the car easily. Because make that a little bit bigger. I'm having trouble getting it in. Yep, I'm going to make it a 9/16. Okay, we're going to enlarge that hole to 9/16, and hopefully that'll work. If not, let's go to 5/8. Gonna take the 5/8. I think I'm gonna have to make the 5/8 work because I don't think I have another bit that's bigger than this. Okay, now the trick is to go underneath and pull that forward as far as I feel I need it underneath so that I can cut it off on the inside and run wires through it. Okay, what I'm going to try to do is to cut that off and then run the ground and the hot wire for the pump through it. If I can't push it through it, then likelihood is I will pull it back out, put the wires inside it, and push them all in together as one unit. But for now, it's what we're going to attempt. I'm going to use a little bit more of that wire loom on the bottom side to protect the wires all the way up to the fuel pump. But I'm going to protect each wire individually there because I don't see any way of putting the two connectors, because they're pretty big. I don't see any way of putting those two connectors through one 3/8 inch wire or loom. I'm going to try to tape the two of those wires together so that they hopefully will go through better as one unit. Like I said, if they don't go through, we'll just pull the loom out, put the wires in it, push it all through as one unit. it's pretty much going in pretty easy, or it came out the gap in the loom. I'm gonna have to take a look under the car and see if I can see what's going on. Oh, I see the wires under there. Whether they're inside the loom or whether they've gone outside of it is a whole new question, so I'm going to have to raise the car and take a look. So I'm going to pull the loom out, put the wires in it, and then run it back through. And what I'm going to do, so that the wires don't break out of the loom, is periodically I am going to just tape a little bit. Tape the loom a little bit. It's interesting, it looks like I've got a knot in the purple wire. Okay, well that's fine. We're going to start the loom here. We'll pull it down through, and we'll take care of the knot from underneath. First thing I'm going to do is put these two wires in and get a wrap of black tape around the loom so that they don't want to pop out again. What my intention is to, once I've got this all in, I'm going to pull as much wire as I can through the loom so that when all's said and done, at the other end, I'll just pull it through and cut the excess off on that end. So this is what I'm going to be doing for the next several minutes. So I'm going to shut off the camera and pick it back up when I'm done on the bottom side again. So as you can see, I've pulled them both through already. There's the black. I've already put a connector on it. Here's the purple. I'm going to put a connector on it. That way I saved the most wire that I could. And I just lost my purple wire. Okay, so we're going to strip the end of the purple wire. And I lost it again. It keeps wanting to run away on me. Okay, so put a connector on the purple one. Aha, it didn't get away. the red to the purple because that's the power. Black to the black because that's the ground. And I'm going to take some more of this wire loom. I'm going to run it from this end, same way I did up front. I'm going to tape it so the wire doesn't come out. I'm going to gently pull that black wire and purple wire from the front into that compartment there and take the slack out of them. And take these wires as I go. Or not the wires, the loom as I go. It's going to be hard to do. Started on the loom. At least it's pulled out at the connector. Probably an easier way to do this is to put it on the big connector first, run it through that taped up part, and then make the wiring connection. Tuck it back inside the loom. And what I'm going to do is start the other end. Do it the same way I accidentally did it. Separate it. Start the big connector through. Connect it back up. And then as I slip these looms up, I'll tape them periodically. Until I get them all the way, or most of the way, I should say. And then what I'll do is I'll go and pull the wire back into the inside gently so that I don't disconnect it. And then I'll cut this where appropriate to have as much of the wire in the loom as I can. So this is what the finished product looks like. Here's the wire looms on the pump. Help protect those wires a little bit and give it a little bit neater look. All I need to do now is get those two compression fittings to convert to the AN lines for the fuel line and the return, and I'll be back on the road. I got the last couple pieces to go on the hard lines. I got compression fittings that convert over to AN fittings, so I'll be able to hook them up to these lines over here. That one's a 3/8, this one's a 5/16. I got one of each of the fittings. The 5/16 is going to be one of my return lines because I'm going to use two. And there's the line that goes to the pressure regulator relief port. And I don't know if you can see it here, but I've got that teed off and another line going over here that goes to another hard line that's on the other side of the car. Together, those two lines provide a bigger line to return than the pressure line, so I ought to get maximum efficiency out of the pump. Okay, so I've got a little more wiggle room to play with there. So the first fitting goes down on the line. Whoops, dropped. So I finally got it running. It was a long, hard process. A couple things happened. When I hooked up the fuel line to my filter in my fuel pump, for some reason there was no gas coming out of the tank. So when I tried it the first time, it didn't work. After disconnecting a few lines to find out, that it was actually the tank that was not providing any gas. The way I cured it was I took some compressed air and I blew backward into the tank, and apparently when I ran the car till it stalled, it must have sucked in part of that sock, because it looked like it was intact when I looked in the tank, but I blew it out, and after I did that and put it back together, everything started fine. So I've had it running to where it was warmed up, and it's a pretty hot day. It's in the mid-80s already, and so I shut it off and I let it sit for probably 10 minutes, which is the worst case for vapor lock. So I'm gonna try to hold the camera with one hand and hit the starter with the other. Excuse me if it's a little if I'm shaking the camera a bit. So here goes. Fired right up. Go back over to the other side. Of pressure, which probably is good for this car. So I am going to run to the gas station, fill it up, and see how it runs on a longer trip. There is a noise from the pump in the back. I can't hear it so much with the car running. And the hood up, but without the hood up, you can hear the pump going. It's not too bad though. Once you get up to highway speeds, I'm sure you won't hear it at all. Well, I think that's the end of the project, unless I have something more to report after coming back from getting gas, but I expect it'll be okay. Thanks for watching. So I went to try to get gas. Everything was not okay, because I got about halfway there, had to stop for a light. When I started to pull away from the light, I got going maybe about 5 miles an hour, and it vapor locked on me again. Now I'm drifting, so I was able to cruise into a gas station, which was not the one I was intending to go to. But now, because I had removed the fuel pump, the mechanical one, I didn't have the option of throwing water on the mechanical fuel pump. So I went and had it towed home. So I was thinking at that point that the reason that it stalled actually wasn't vapor lock, but was actually fuel being unable to get through the sock in the tank. So went to Summit Racing and I got a new unit for it. So this is the new unit, and it has the float on it for the gas gauge and the sock, the filter sock, and there's the place that goes up into the tank, and all this goes in the tank. So one of the things I noticed about this is if you look at that, there's probably a good 6 inches above the bottom of the tank that gas has to be sucked up through that tube to get to the outlet. Well, I know a little bit about the physics of liquids. They'll seek their own level, but it won't provide drainage through this loop unless you have enough gas in the tank to cover that whole tube. Well, even though I had about 10 gallons in the tank, I didn't have enough. I was a good 3 inches shy of the top of that tube. The gas level was maybe about here. So anyways, I went to Summit Racing. I got a new pickup. This one apparently was clogged. I couldn't shine a light through it. And while I was there, I asked the guy that was selling me it about the electric fuel pump and its ability to suck gas up over that hump, even though the electric fuel pump tells you that it needs to be gravity fed. And he said that it would suck it up over the top. So I came home and I changed it out. So now I've got a new sending unit with a new sock. So there is no obstruction there. And when I installed it, I put my little jumper, kicked on the starter or the fuel pump motor, and I did in fact get gas, and it was showing on my pressure gauge there. And so I was like, okay, cool, it's got gas and it's coming up and the pump is doing it. Well, decided to take it for a ride on my street this time, and after it was warmed up, of course, and it was running okay, and I kicked it down, floored it. I drained, I guess, what gas was in the carburetor, and I didn't quite make it up the hill. I ended up about 100 yards short of my driveway, but on an uphill, so I couldn't coast to the driveway. So the next thing was get out my jumper and see if I've got any fuel pressure. I put the jumper on it. There was 0 pressure. Oh, I should mention that while I was at Summit Racing, I had come up with the idea of adding a second fuel pressure gauge. And my idea here was if I had one prior to the regulator and the fuel filter, if there was a big difference between what was coming out of the fuel filter versus what was going into it, I could be sure my fuel filter was clogged and needed change. So I bought the fittings I needed to add that second pressure regulator, and I bought a spare fuel pump or fuel filter just in case that was clogged. So at this point, I know that I'm not getting pressure here when it's hot. I honestly think that my problem is, and has been for a while, is that fuel pump can't suck the gas over the top of this loop that's in that fuel pickup line. And my question is, once I fill up the gas tank and it's over that level, the gas is going to seek its own level, so it will push gas up that tube and over and down and out the outlet, wrong side, out this outlet, which goes to the fuel filter external in the back, and then to the fuel pump, and those are all lower than this outlet. The big question in my mind is, am I going to run into a problem every time that my fuel gets below that, or once I get gas in that tube, is it going to maintain it when I shut off the engine because of natural siphoning? So that's where we're going now. But before I do that, there is one other place where I could be having a problem. And that is this AN rubber stainless coat covered fuel line that's in the front here that has been on here ever since. Now, if that's swelling up when it gets hot and cutting off the fuel supply, that could be my problem, because when I installed the last time, both of these were showing no pressure. So to confirm that I'm actually getting fuel through this rubber line, I'm going to take this fuel pressure gauge and I'm going to put it down here where the hard line converts over to the rubber line, the flexible line. And that way I can determine whether, if it heats up and I've got more pressure here than I have here, I'll know that this rubber line is the problem. So I'm going to do that first, even though I don't think that's the problem, just because once I fill up the tank with fuel, then it makes it harder to do that, because I could end up, as I disconnect that, I could end up with it siphoning right out that fitting on the hard line. But as it sits right now, if I disconnect that hard line, I know that I'm below this high spot in the pickup line, so it won't siphon. There will be some gas potentially in the line, but it won't siphon. So I'm going to disconnect that now and put that pressure gauge down on that, and we're going to try it again and see what happens. One thing I wanted to mention was the way I know that the fuel wasn't higher than that loop in the pickup line is because I have an inspection camera that I was able to feed that flexible line in there and actually look at it, and that's how I know that it isn't up that high in the gas isn't that high in the tank. So I'm going to try to blow a little bit of air pressure back through that line to get rid of any gas that's in it so it doesn't go everywhere whenever I do this. So I put a rubber piece of hose on here that I can kind of mate up to this. What I've done is I've removed the gas cap, and I'm using very low air pressure because I just want to get the gas out of it. I don't want to blow up the tank. I removed the gas tank cap so that I don't pressurize the tank and have it all blow back at me when I loosen that connection. Well, it seemed like I couldn't blow it back, but I don't know that it's not the fuel filter or the fuel pump that's blocking it. So it's the best I can do. I'm going to take this off and take that pressure gauge off and mount it lower so that I can see what I've got once I put it back together. So I've hooked up the jumper where I had with the button so that I can trigger the fuel pump to pump. And unfortunately I can't show you the gauge on the bottom because it's very hard to see, but I can see it and I'll be able to tell whether there's a big difference between the first one and the second one. I'm starting to hear a little bit. Looks like looks like I'm seeing about 5 pounds up here. I'm going to have to get a flashlight so I can actually see the one on the bottom. So I heard fuel pumping. It did sound a little bubbly. So I'll do this again. I'm at about 5 pounds both places. So it seems like, at least when it's cold, that that rubber hose is not a problem. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to have to back the car out of the garage here to do it, but I am going to have to warm it up and then check those two as it's warm, because I did notice the last time that I had it out that when it heated up I saw the fuel pressure start to drop. It was dropping on both gauges. So if I see the same thing, then I'll know to look further back into the tank. And my next thing to try is going to be to get enough gas in there to make it higher than that loop so that I get the pressure of the gas actually pushing the air out of the loop and hopefully starting a siphon, if you will, to the fuel pump. I've got it running outside now. Started off, I had about 5.5 pounds of pressure on that gauge that you're seeing, and down the bottom I had about the same, maybe a little more. And now, as you can see, we're at about 4.5 on the top gauge and we're under 5 on the bottom gauge. So I'm pretty well convinced that the rubber line up in the front is not the problem. I'll let it run for just a little bit more and then I'll pull it into the garage and shut it down to save battery and gas. And my next move will be to go to the gas station, fill up a couple of gas cans and bring it back and get that level above that loop in the pickup. The question I'll have then is if that cures it, which I suspect it will, because I think what's happening now is the fuel pump's heating up because it's getting bubbles instead of a full flow of gas. But then the question I have will be, will it still run okay when the fuel level falls below that? Will it hold that siphon while it sits for days, maybe a week at a time? And that'll be the next update. So, since I know that hose, the fuel line, the flexible fuel line, is not swelling up and closing it off, I moved the new gauge, pressure gauge, to there. And I took a peek inside the tank with the inspection camera, and it looked like gas was about here because the float was up a little bit, but it was, so you're looking at another good 3-4 inches before the pressure of the gas in the tank will actually cause it to flow over that loop. So I am going to fill the tank right now, get it up higher than that, and see what happens. I measured the old sending unit, and from the top of this mount to the top of the loop is 5.5 inches. I just added another 5 gallons of gas to the tank, and I looked in it with the inspection camera, and I'm still not over the top of that loop. So I've got at least 15 gallons in that tank now, I think. I have another 5-gallon can. I'm going to try to empty that into it, and we'll see how far. I don't even know if I can get the inspection camera in, though, once the gas gets up that high in the tank. So I may have to, the reason I measured this is because I may have to just take a stick or something and use a dipstick method and see how deep the gas is in the gas tank, and then give myself a little bit of leeway, see how that is. So we're at the back of the car, and my new sending unit is right here. I've got a full tank of gas now, so it should be over that. And what I'm going to do is, because there could be an air pocket in the top of this fuel filter, I am going to take that down and tilt it up so that fuel can fill it from the bottom and push the air through to the pump. Hopefully that will be everything I need to do, because frankly, if this doesn't work, I'm out of ideas. So the weight of the gas in the tank should be pushing the fuel down, so the air, it shouldn't go back. But if it can, then it should just, now it'll get caught at the, it would get caught in the thing here. I can see that I've got some ties holding that up. I'm going to clip those so I can get more movement on that fuel filter. Okay, so I've clipped those and it's hanging down further. And now I can aim this up. And in theory, the weight of the gasoline coming out of the tank will push the air, because it's lighter, out of that filter. And I'm trying to get it as far vertical as I can, just to get every bit of air out of it. But it should fill that filter full of gas so that there's no air bubble to break the siphon once it starts, because it seems like if it breaks that siphon and the pump has to prime itself, then you're only going to be able to get about 5 gallons of usable gas in the tank because that loop is so high. Now, I have thought of one other solution to that problem, and that is to cut that pickup, put a T in it, and run it basically sideways, run the one that actually picks up the gas sideways, and just leave the part that's there for the gas gauge, just leave it there and cap it off so the gas doesn't go in it, because it would be unfiltered at that point. Although, if that happened, this filter should catch it. So I don't know how long to leave this like this, but I do want to make sure that gasoline, in theory, the weight of that gasoline, since the level is way up in the tank, it ought to push all the air all the way through and up that line that comes out of the fuel pump, in theory. So yeah, I have no way of checking whether or not that is actually getting to the fuel pump by gravity, so that the fuel pump doesn't have to work to suck it out of over that hump in the pickup tube. Okay, I've got a full tank of gas. I tried to bleed all the air forward of the fuel pump. I still have it jumpered so that the fuel pump's going to kick on as soon as I turn the key. And I'm going to let it run for a bit and check for leaks, since I had some of those lines off to move that pressure gauge. So I'm reading almost 6 on the one off of the fuel pump, and that's about perfect. This one is probably a little bit, either the gauge is off or the filter's got some resistance in it, but it's reading 5 times. So looks good on the leaks. I'm going to proceed to move it out and start it. So I have a thermostat in my radiator cap, and from that I can tell that I'm much hotter right now than I was yesterday when I had a problem. Now, that being said, still I'm not certain about whether this is the final solution or not, because I don't know if you can read it, but showing about 3 pounds of pressure on the new gauge coming from the fuel pump, and only 2.5 on the part coming out of the fuel filter. I don't have the car in gear, obviously, since I'm standing here, but I think that's the next thing, is I need to try and put in gear, see how it reacts under throttle, and go from there. So I put it in gear and it ran smooth that whole time, and now well above the temperature I had a problem with before. Still showing a little over 3 pounds of pressure on the fuel line into the regulator, and 2.5 out of the filter. So I am going to try to drive it up and down the driveway, see how it reacts under throttle. Okay, the engine is pretty warm. been idling for a long time. I did have it up and down the driveway once. It seemed to respond well, and I'm going to show you. Okay, I've got a different problem here. It's not fuel pressure, because I do have fuel pressure. Quite possibly it's not in tune for actually having enough fuel pressure, so it may be needing to have some carburetor adjustments done. For now though, I'm going to shut the video off and see if I can get it started, take it on a ride. The last time I did it, I didn't floor it straight from a standstill. This time that's what I tried to do, and apparently I flooded it out as opposed to starving it for fuel. I started it up, started right up, but when I came around to look at the fuel pressure after it started, it was very low, and as it's been idling here, it's picked up some. So not sure what to think about that. There will be more investigations going on. So I ran it up and down the driveway a few times, and I believe that the reason it stalled was it needs an accelerator pump in the carburetor, because I ran it from a stop and tried to accelerate, and there was a hesitation, and then I got going and I mashed it from there, and there was a hesitation, and that's a classic sign that the accelerator pump isn't doing its job. It should be giving it an extra squirt of gas for that hard acceleration for the quick pickup. So right now what I'm doing is I'm waiting for about 15 minutes, and then I am going to try to start it because the engine was good and hot. This is, setting it for 15 minutes now is a classic way that vapor lock starts. So when my alarm goes off, I'll open up the hood and try and start her. There's my alarm. Time to try to start it. I'm going to leave the hood down so that it's under the types of conditions where if you took it out, went in a store or something, came back 20 minutes later and tried to start it. Well, it did start. Taking a couple seconds to settle down. There's some fluctuation in the fuel pressure gauges, but according to the temperature gauge on the radiator cap, it's right at 220 degrees, so that's pretty high. That would not have started before. Now the only thing that remains to be seen is, can I drain some of that gas off of there. I'm not going to do it today. I've had enough of this today. But I will siphon out some of that gas, get the engine warm, get it below that loop in the pickup tube, and see if it runs for me with that situation. Because right now it's not running great, but like I said, I had it tuned probably for bad fuel supply. So I'll do some adjustments and see where we can go from there. So it's been about 42 hours since I parked this. It was hot when I put it away, so if there's any percolation going on in the carburetor, that should have happened. I'm going to try to get it to start, and I'm going to focus in on these two gauges so that I can come back and use this as basically a diagnostic to figure out what's going on if it fails to start. First thing I'm going to do is pump the accelerator a couple times to get the choke to set, and hit the starter and see what happens. Okay, that was interesting. I don't know, I'm going to have to shut off the recording and take a look at the video, see what happened with the gauges. Okay, I forgot to mention that I had reconnected the safety switch there that only gives you a pump if you have oil pressure or you're turning the starter. It didn't look like any pressure generated at those gauges in trying to start it. So I am going to try to start it again, since it was just starting to show some pressure as the engine died. Well, that was interesting because it was showing barely any fuel pressure, but the engine was running, and then it died. So I'm going to try to start it again, but I'm beginning to wonder if I need to prime that pump, get the pressure up before I try to start it. Which would mean I'd have to maybe wire in some kind of a manual switch to do that. I'm not really impressed with the results of this electric fuel pump at this point. So after about 3 or 4 cycles of starting it and it's stalling, stalling, I finally got pressure up to the gauges and therefore gas in the carburetor, and now it's running. I'm really going to have to do some research into this, because That's not acceptable. I do know that I could do like I did with the jumper wire, put a button in there and just prime the pumps before I try to start the engine. That's kind of disappointing to have to do that. You should be able to get in a car, turn the ignition on, and have it go. One of the things that I want to make sure I'm doing is covering that loop in the fuel pickup. So I have a yardstick here. I'm going to measure the fuel in the tank. It was about 5.5 inches it had to be over it. I'm measuring close to 9.5. So that is not the problem. The fuel is higher than that pickup. I'll just set this dipstick outside so it can dry off without giving me fumes in the garage. So my plan for this morning, based on the assumption that was invalid, that I would be able to start the car relatively easy this morning and it would actually go ahead and pump some fuel quickly for me. My plan was to siphon off some of the gas in the gas tank and get the level in the tank below that loop in the fuel pickup line to see if that line held the siphon. Once you shut it off and once you got low on gas, would it hold that siphon so that you could actually run the car at a fuel level below that loop in the pickup and still be able to start it and run it without experiencing a fuel supply issue. I don't know how valid that test is going to be this morning based on the results of the cold start after sitting for a couple days. But I think it's worth doing anyway, just to see if I could do that. And maybe that's, I'll run it till it gets hot, see if I experience a fuel delivery issue when it's hot and below that loop in the pickup line. And if I do, that's kind of bad because you wouldn't be able to run the car less than maybe half a tank, and that's not really acceptable. If it does maintain it and I'm able to start it, say, tomorrow morning or, 5-6 hours after I park it, well, that would be a good sign. And the only thing I'd have to address at that point is actually why I'm not getting pressure as soon as that pump comes on. It seemed to take quite a bit of time. I did get up to like 5.5 pounds of pressure, which was decent, but I don't know where I'm going to go from there, but that's going to be my first thing, is to siphon off some gas, get it below that loop in the pickup, run the car till it gets hot and see if I lose my fuel pressure. And I have I'll call it a vapor lock, although I'm not sure that's what it'll be. It's just a fuel delivery issue when it's hot. So that's my next step. Okay, I've drained about 10 gallons out of the gas tank, and that puts me well below the high point in that loop in the pickup, because I was still below it before I added the last 5 gallons the other day. So I'm going to start the car and use this again to monitor what happens with my fuel pressure gauges. Okay, we're showing good pressure right off the bat. The only thing I question is the car was just started a few minutes ago, so it didn't have time to bleed down and lose that siphon, if that indeed is what is happening. But I am going to proceed with getting this warmed up and seeing if we have a fuel starvation issue with it being less than a full tank of gas below that pickup loop, and then we'll go from there, see what we got. Okay, so I ran it, and initially it had good fuel pressure, but very quickly ran out. I'm going to try to crank it a bit and see what happens, but I got around to the other side of the car and it looked like it was at basically zero pressure. Okay, this thing might have been a mistake on my part, because when I went to take off the ignition wire, I'm sorry, it's the wire that goes to the fuel pump, the relay. I went to take that off, it fell off. So I may not have had that on there securely, and maybe the relay wasn't kicking in and wasn't actually putting any power to the fuel pump, so this whole test may be somewhat invalid. I've got my jumper in again so that I don't have to crank the engine and wear the battery down to test the fuel pump. Now, even at that, it's taking a couple seconds to get up to some pressure. So I'm fairly certain that the fuel pump probably was running, and it ran it out without the full tank of gas. I had just put the gas back in, and that's why I was testing the pressure again. So I'm going to call that a valid test. Maybe it just was running, because I tried cranking it. Actually, with the car running, it just ran out of fuel. Okay, I just couldn't go with the results of a flawed test, so I went and siphoned the gas out again, and before I did that, I had primed the pump so that there was pressure. I had 5.5 pounds on both these gauges, or thereabouts. And so now I siphoned the gas off, so it should be below that loop in the tank. And after I start it, I'm going to go actually measure it. But right now I'm going to start the car. Works better whenever you have the wires connected, I think. I'll see what happens. about 4.25 inches of gas in the tank, which is below the 5.5 that was the height of that loop. And I think I actually measured to a lower part of the tank than where that pickup unit fits into the tank. So I think we have less than 4.25. So we're definitely below the loop in that fuel pickup. So we're going to leave it run a while, get it up to temperature, and see how it reacts. Okay, gas is back in the tank. Looking at the thermostat on the radiator, the engine hasn't cooled down much. So that would mean that the gasoline in the tank is above the loop in the pickup line. It might take a few cranks to get pressure up here because it was out. But we're gonna see what happens here. There was enough fuel in the carb to get it started, and the fuel pump is trying to get back up to some decent pressure. Not sure why there's that delay. And I had just shut the car off, and well, actually I was using the jumper cable, the cheater cord, so that I could just run the fuel pump without trying to crank it over. If I shut it off and I turned it right back on, I got fuel pressure pretty quick. Looking at about 4 pounds here. Unfortunately, it looks like I'm going to have to do something about getting that loop out of that pickup line. Thinking maybe cut the line, put a T-fitting in it, and run a little piece of rubber hose from that T to the strainer, and that way it would lay near the bottom of the tank, and I wouldn't have this problem of getting the gas up and over that loop. But it does appear to make a difference when you have a full tank. I would not want to run the car and go anywhere with, even 3/4 of a tank, because by the time you get there, you'd be in danger of that a thing falling below that loop, and you're losing your siphon, and then you're stuck. I'm going to leave this run a while, make sure it gets hotter than it was when it failed. It's like it's at the temperature that it failed with a low gas tank right now, and it's running pretty smooth. But I need to run it a lot longer and see what happens. To run decent if you accelerate slowly, but if you goose the throttle, it definitely is lacking shot from the accelerator pump. So I found out in doing a little research on that that there are 3 holes in the arm that actuates it, and one of them will give you the shot sooner. So I'm going to try moving it to that first, since that is the easiest thing to do and won't cost me anything, and I don't have to take the carburetor apart. So that makes sense to try that first before I go get an accelerator pump, which is a 60-mile round trip to the closest place that has it in stock, which happens to be Summit Racing. So, more later. So I decided to work on a different project, and then I needed some parts for that. And on the way over to the store for the parts, I got to thinking about this. And I got to wondering, what if this fuel filter is not letting enough fuel through to feed the pump? So I am going to try it without it. One of the things that when I came home, I looked at the invoice for this, and even though it doesn't say it on the website, the invoice says this is an EFI fuel filter. It's 100 micron, and their website for this part says 100 micron filters are recommended for both fuel injection and carbureted systems as a pre-filter, which is what I'm using it for. So I'm running out of ideas here, and I'm just wondering, is that the problem? So I am going to take that off and bypass it and see what happens. So I happened to have a union around, AM union, and I was able to easily fit that in there. I don't like the idea of those clamps being on this rubber hose, so I'm going to put a protector on it from a wiring sheath. Keep that from cutting it. Everything's still flowing downhill. Should have plenty of gravity feed into the pump. And we'll take the car off the lift and see what's what. Well, I'm ready for the big test again. If it fires up with more than 5 pounds of pressure, 5.5 pounds, I'll be pretty excited because I'll think I have the problem cured. Here goes nothing. I've got almost 6 pounds of pressure. So leave it run for a while and see what happens. So you can see that the pressure is falling off, already down to about 2 pounds. I'm going to pull it into the garage before it dies. some unexplained reason, when I pulled it into the garage, it recovered to about 3.5 to 4, but I guess I don't think that the fuel filter was the problem. I noticed that the pressure gauge is jumping, it's not steady. I would think that an electrical gauge would be, an electrical pump would be steady. Flowing over that hump in the thing. Okay, now we're down, fell down to about 2, actually almost 1. Now it's come back up to about 3.5. So for whatever reason, we're not getting steady pressure out of this. We should be, I would think. It's dropping down to 2. Okay, well, I'm going to shut it off before I asphyxiate myself here. I've got all the doors open, but still don't want to breathe too much of that. So you can see that the pressure is falling off, already down to about 2 pounds. I'm going to pull it into the garage before it dies. For some unexplained reason, when I pulled it into the garage, it recovered to about 3.5 to 4, but I guess I don't think that the fuel filter was the problem. I noticed that the pressure gauge is jumping, it's not steady. I would think that an electrical gauge would be, an electrical pump would be steady. Flowing over that hump in the thing. Okay, now we're down, fell down to about 2, actually almost 1. Now it's come back up to about 3.5. So for whatever reason, we're not getting steady pressure out of this. We should be, I would think. It's dropping down to 2. Okay, well, I'm going to shut it off before I asphyxiate myself here. I've got all the doors open, but still don't want to breathe too much of that. So after the last test, I finally decided it has to be the pump. So I called the company and they sent me a new one, which I had to pay for. This is not Summit Racing, since I've mentioned their name several times in this video. So they sent me a new pump. And after this thing has sat here for several days, waiting on that new pump to come in, I noticed that I've got a little damp spot on the floor, and that in fact there are little drips of gas on these bolts. So that pump is leaking. It was leaking when I first installed it. I tightened the bolts. I thought it was stopped, but that may be the reason that it's failing to keep pumping at the right pressures. It may be sucking some air in through those leaks, since air is easier to suck in than the gas. So, long story short, I have the new pump. Recall I took the fuel filter out, so that's going to go back in. Going to change out the pump. Going to make sure I have gasoline siphoning down to the pump, and then we're going to try this again. So here's where we are so far. I put the filter back on and I released the clamp of the fuel line, and there is no fuel coming through that filter to speak of. Sending that back, I specifically asked the customer service rep when I was talking about the pump, is that filter, that pre-filter, good for a carbureted application? And he told me it was. So what I have confirmed so far is that without having the filter in place up to here, I have a free flow of gasoline when I unclamp that line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unclamp that again. Before I do that, I'm going to kind of preset a clamp for down here, so I can shut it off easily, because I don't want to drain too much out of the tank. But what I'm going to do is attempt to show that without this clamp, I have a free flow of gasoline, which now without the pump in there, or the filter in there, is going to be all the way to the pump. So here goes. Okay, free flow of gasoline to the pump. Now, you recall that last week when I eliminated the filter, the pump still overheated. Or I'm assuming it overheated, because basically what happened was it ended up not being able to maintain pressure. It just kept falling. So I'm going to hook this up here so that I don't have it sitting in gasoline in that pot while I work on the replacing of the fuel pump. so that should sit there while I work on the fuel pump. So here's where we are so far. I put the filter back on and I released the clamp of the fuel line, and there is no fuel coming through that filter to speak of. Sending that back, I specifically asked the customer service rep when I was talking about the pump, is that filter, that pre-filter, good for a carbureted application? And he told me it was. So what I have confirmed so far is that without having the filter in place up to here, I have a free flow of gasoline when I unclamp that line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unclamp that again. Before I do that, I'm going to kind of preset a clamp for down here so I can shut it off easily, because I don't want to drain too much out of the tank. But what I'm going to do is attempt to show that without this clamp, I have a free flow of gasoline, which now without the pump in there, or the filter in there, is going to be all the way to the pump. So here goes. Okay, free flow of gasoline to the pump. Okay, I'm getting ready to put the new pump in. In, out. Okay, it's mounted. I'm going to connect the wires. Purple wire is the power from my relay. Goes through the red wire on the pump. I'm going to cover that up with the wire loom. And I will tape that a bit later. And black wire goes to the black wire, which I have grounded all the way back to the battery, so that I'm guaranteed a good ground on this. Cover that with the wire loom. Okay, I'm going to shut the video off while I just put some black tape on that to make sure that doesn't fall off. So So as we demonstrated before, we have free-flowing gasoline in this line. I am going to slowly release it and make sure that we've got gasoline flowing through the pump, although I'm not sure that it will flow. There. Free-flowing gasoline through the pump. Point out that I don't have a restriction here where I hook that line up. So let me tighten that and we'll loosen the clamp. Okay, that's tightened. I'm getting ready to loosen the clamp. Hopefully there's no leaks in this pump. Seems like it's so far so good. I'm going to have to clamp up that line and make sure it's not twisted. I might have to loosen that a bit to twist the line on the fitting to the pump because it doesn't look like, maybe I can do it. I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to route this without it having a twist in it. But it looks like it's going to be fine. So I'll clamp this back up to the frame, or the cross member here, the gas tank support, because I don't want that weight of those fittings bouncing around. So we'll get that set, and I guess we'll be ready to try it out. So it's been sitting for a few minutes. There don't appear to be any leaks. I'm going to have to get another fuel filter. I don't know if I'll buy that same one. I have a lack of confidence in it. I don't know that it is actually for carbureted cars because on the invoice it said EFI fuel filter, but on the web page it said 100 micron filters were for either carbureted or EFI systems. So that's why I bought it. And as I said before, I asked the customer service rep when I was talking about the pump not working, about whether that was the right filter for it, and he said, yep, that should work. So I was very surprised whenever I put that in and I had zero gasoline flow, and as we've demonstrated, gasoline is flowing freely from the tank up to that filter, and then after I got that filter out of there, it demonstrated that it came freely through the fuel pump. So I'm going to put the car down now and give her a start. Okay, I'm ready to fire it up. My gas line's probably empty except for there is free flow down to the fuel pump. I'm going to pump the accelerator a couple times to reset to set the choke, and we'll see how fast pressure comes up. Fluctuation in those pressures. I'm going to back it out of the been running for about 13, 14 minutes. That was enough for it to show serious signs of fuel starvation before. Now the gauges are fluctuating, but I guess they're keeping around 3 to 4 pounds at a minimum. And this pressure regulator is, the fuel pump is supposed to self-regulate, so that might be the normal operation of the thing. And then whenever it needs a little more pressure, it comes back up. When I took it for a test drive, it didn't run very well, but that's all carburetor, probably having to do with the accelerator pump. But I think, other than getting a pre-filter back in line there, I think this is actually going to work. So this is definitely hotter and longer than it's ever run since I put the electric pump on. Revving it up gives me 5.5 pounds of pressure, so I think we're good on the fuel pump. It's been a long, hard struggle. I hate it when you buy something and it's defective and then you go troubleshooting all kinds of other stuff, replacing all kinds of other stuff, spend a lot of money, and it was a defective part to begin with. So, but that's life. I'll live. Thanks for watching.